YouTube. Just to warn you.
Checking. Mm-hmm.
Every week we open wide the virtual stage where ideas spark and wisdom fills the page. From the UK to the land of maple trees, John and Mike bring clarity with ease. We're building meetings, webinars with might, helping you shine, your message taking flight. Whether you're new or you've done this before, Lord Zoom Live will help you do much more. We're building meetings, webinars with might, helping you shine, your message taking flight. Whether you're new or you've done this before, Lord Zoom Live will help you do much more. Thank you for joining us, we're glad you're here. Together we grow, it's loud and clear. On Zoom we connect, we learn, we grow. Welcome my friend, enjoy the show. From big events to breakout rooms with flair, we've got the tools and we're ready to share. Guest experts drop in, bringing gold each time, with insights and tricks to help you climb. Can't make it live, we've got you still. On YouTube and LinkedIn, we're giving that thrill. So tune in later or catch us next round. Either way, your success is where we're bound. Thank you for joining us, we're glad you're here. Together we grow, it's loud and clear. On Zoom we connect, we learn, we glow. Welcome my friend, enjoy the show. And make it live, we've got you still. On YouTube and LinkedIn, we're giving that thrill. So tune in later or catch us next round. Either way, your success is where we're bound. Now take the spotlight, the stage is yours. Bring your message through virtual doors. Each week we gather, and now you know you're not alone, so let it flow. Thank you for joining us, now go and shine. Share what you've learned, your voice, your time. With Lord Zoom Live, your power will grow. It's time to build your own show.
Hello. Welcome to another Lord Zoom Live. Myself, John, and my colleague Mike. There is a lot of people using Zoom to market their companies. On the corporate side, I think the move to Zoom events is gaining pace. But at the business level and the pro users level, this is not always the case. And there are simple reasons for that. It's a big jump from just running Zoom meetings to running Zoom events. So in this presentation, we're going to look at what is possible when you're just running Zoom meetings. The reason people tell me why they don't want to use Zoom events is it's so expensive, John. It's so expensive. And for a small business or somebody just growing a list at the beginning, then maybe $100 a month is a lot of money. Whereas they can run an event and have up to 100 people on their standard pro license. They could even have up to 300 people on a business license. A lot less expensive than webinars. The second reason people tell me why is I like to see the audience I want to see people. I want to see their reactions. I feel really lonely and I feel I can't do it if I'm on my own. And when I run webinar, it's just me and everybody else has the camera off. This is indeed true. And that is the second reason. The third most common reason people say is it's interaction that's the problem. They want people to be able to hit reaction buttons, to be able to come on camera and interact with a question. They want people to smile, to gasp, and then to see it happening through the gallery so they can see that people are taking an interest. These are all really valid reasons for why you might want to run your marketing presentation not as a webinar, but as a meeting. And I totally get it. And for a lot of reasons, I would agree. Yes, there are reasons why I wouldn't agree, but let's be the positive and talk about the reasons why I would agree. Let's look at the things you can do. And my guess, because I've seen quite a few of these presentation webinars in the last few weeks, I would guess that even the limited features of Zoom meeting are not being exploited by these people. So let's encourage you all to make more of Zoom meetings and make more of the features that are there. So the first thing to talk about is branding. There is a lot more branding available in Zoom meetings now than there was when COVID first struck. And what does that mean? That means that you probably set your account up years ago and you have not taken advantage of the latest features. So please do. But you've got to be careful because this branding is account specific, I think is probably the best way to phrase it. Account specific to a greater degree. And what I mean by that is, unlike webinars and events where you can specifically brand an event completely within itself, with Zoom meetings, you're going to be branding your entire account. So if you make these changes, they're going to apply to any other meeting you run at a similar time, unless you undo the changes. So first of all, let's think about these. And I've put the list in a logical order of how I think people would use them. The first one is, of course, the waiting room. Now you can customize a waiting room quite nicely. You can even put a little video in there welcoming people. But remember, that waiting room video, that waiting room layout will apply to any and all meetings that you use while it's there. So if you are going to have a webinar type experience, be aware that if you run any other meetings on that account, it's going to use the same waiting room. Your profile picture, your profile image, you could customize that for your webinar. But again, remember, it applies to everything. So make sure that if you're going to make use of it, change it again later. Who here knows what a Vanity URL is? Oh, I'm deafened by the silence. You don't know what a Vanity URL is. It is possible to get a URL to prepend zoom.us. So you can be your company.zoom.us. Now, it's a lot harder to do than it used to be. You need to prove you have a connection to that URL and you need to jump through a few hoops, but it is worth it. It was only available to business, but I now hear it can be available to pro users. But certainly if you're a business user, it works well. And Vanity URL also gives you availability to other things like your homepage. Homepage, you say? Nobody's really remembered what the homepage is. Do you remember that big web page when it says join, log in, that is your homepage. And if you are branded, you can customize that as well. Again, this is going to apply to all of your events, all of your meetings. Every time you use that account, it's going to have that look. So again, you may want to think about what the design is. But you've also got the ability to change wallpaper, the background, your background to you, your background to the Zoom meeting as well. And those will apply just as you do it. So that can be very specific. And then there are video filters. You can add video filters, again, at account level. But if you add a video filter at account level, you can then make it appear on your screen. What are video filters? Well, they're the little things that pop up all over your screen that sort of overlay your video. Now, we're in webinars at the moment, but I can still get access to my appearance and play around with that. So I could put in a virtual background like that, which is going to look really weird because I've got another program doing my backgrounds for me outside of Zoom. So Zoom is now trying to add a background to my background. And don't I look cool? It's John in reverse video. Yep, that didn't work too well. Maybe I should have chosen him and just keep really still. Then you would know somebody else is speaking. But I can add virtual backgrounds. I could apply an avatar because I'm a Foxy guy and I need to be a Foxy person, or I could just use a more customized avatar to me. But that's not really branding, is it? But video filters are, because I can add a video filter like that. And I can make use of that. I could do the square one there. And I've got a Lord Zoom branded video filter, which appears in the top corner up there. So I can make use of video filters. The other way I could brand the whole system is by using a third-party tool that will take my video signal and play around with it and then send that on as if that's my camera. OBS is the one I'm going to mention because OBS is the free program. There are lots of other pieces of software to do that. Personally, I use vMix, and vMix is on the system now. You're actually watching me through vMix, but I haven't really added any special effects for this particular part. However, as when it comes to branding, to be able to have something like OBS, vMix, or any of these other tools, and then that allows you to customize the look. Again, that is customizing the branding. And of course, we are using Production Studio here because we're running a Zoom webinar. But I could have used some of the screen share techniques. And in fact, because Zoom is so clever, I can actually add them now. So I can actually add some of the screen share techniques. So if we were looking at my branding slide as a screen, then I can add myself to that slide. So I can make myself side by side to that slide. Just like Production Studios made me. So if I hit the share button on that, I've broken it. So it didn't work. There we are. I was trying to get it to make the change while I was using it already. It didn't work. Let's try it a second time. Let's see if we can do this. I'll do an over-the-shoulder one. No, I'll do a side-by-side. That makes more sense. And you can see I'm screen sharing side-by-side. If you can catch up with me. But Production Studio is breaking it, which is fascinating. Something I really must look into more. So let's go back to just standard branding. Of course, you wouldn't be in the Production Studio, so you wouldn't have this confusion of systems. But I think we've just found an issue with Production Studio, which I love. So we'll look into that later. But as far as branding is concerned, putting something like OBS around it is going to work really well. But there are a couple of other places where we can add branding to the event to make it more interesting. And that is the registration process. And you've got two options here with your registration process. Firstly, you have some registration questions that you can ask when people register for your meeting. So you have some basic customizations there. But of course, if you want to make your whole event look more like a webinar, like an event, like a Zoom event, and add all the other features in, like emails and reminders and things like that, then you may want to use a third-party program. There are many third-party products out there which will take registration for you, and then they will send the names of the users into your meeting. You can do it on Eventbrite and Meetup, although I think you have to pay to a certain level to get that option in those products. If you've got your own CRM, it may have a registration process which will then lead into Zoom. And if it hasn't, then products like Pabbly and Zapier, they would allow you to have a registration form to then use Zapier or Pabbly to put that data into your meeting. Because adding people to Zoom meetings is a bit more tricky. And what I mean by that is there isn't an obvious way to start adding registrants. You can buy software, so if you've got these other apps, they can add, but you can't do it directly as easily in meetings. You can add people when you first define the meeting, but after that, you're pretty much stuck. You could, of course, register people yourself by hand. You could put them in for the registration form, but again, this is all a little bit, well, what I'm trying to say politely, it's all a little bit of a fiddle and a faddle and work. That's okay if you have taken the decision that you want the most inexpensive version and you're prepared to do a bit more by hand. That's fine. But if you do add these little tools, you're going to start finding your pricing for doing this type of thing is starting to build up again. So that's just a little hint that it's a stairway to the heaven that is Zoom events. All these little stages are going to give you an extra feature that's going to get a point where you're going to think to yourself, okay, John, I give in. I'll run Zoom webinars instead. But when it comes to running live, we've actually got quite a bit of fun here. Because all those features in Zoom meetings work really well when we run a webinar type experience. We've got third-party products for the scenes. In other words, we can make this more interesting than just my webinar box. But we've got lots of other things as well. For instance, pre-show. Yes, I know. There are two types of people in Zoom. There are types of people in Zoom who always turn up 30 seconds after the meeting is supposed to have started because they've just got a life of back-to-back Zooms. And there's another group of people who like to be prepared in this world, and they'll turn up 5 to 10 minutes beforehand and get really annoyed if the person that's going to run it hasn't yet turned up to the meeting. If you are, of course, running a webinar and you can start it 10 to 15 minutes early and even tell people it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes early, you can run some what we would call pre-roll content or pre-show content, depending which world you live in. And what I'm talking about is conversations with your audience to warm them up, maybe run a poll, maybe run a quiz, maybe bring somebody to the stage and ask them some questions. Maybe just be boring and play a pre-designed webinar video about what the webinar is about. Maybe have some fun with one of these AI tools like we have and write a song about your webinar. By the way, that's the secret. You write the lyrics and then you give it to the song program. So the lyrics are about your event. but it's good fun. Once you have started your meeting, you have a lot of control. Firstly, there's an option in Zoom meetings which allows you to say, I would like permission to turn on and off people's audio. If they give you the consent when they join the meeting, by the way, once you get the consent off them, any other meetings, you have the consent automatically. Yes, it can be revoked, but you have the consent automatically. What that means is you now have the ability to stop people turning on and off their audio whenever they like, which is very annoying. You can disable them from doing that and just turn on the audio for anybody if you ever want them to speak. You can turn on off cameras, but if you can encourage them to be on camera all the time and you spotlight yourself, then they'll all be watching you until you spotlight or add to spotlight other people. So again, you are providing control to your environment. Make sure your security settings keep everything locked down. Don't allow people to screen share unless you particularly want people to screen share. And you can even control the chat. I hate it when people turn off the chat for the whole meeting. It's as if they don't want us to talk to each other. But you can turn on and off the chat. You can limit the chat to just you and the audience. You can limit it to public chat and stop people chatting privately. Or you can allow them to chat privately. It's up to you. But you've got that control. And what's more, and most people just don't seem to recognize this, you can change the rules during the whole meeting. You can turn on and off these features as you find it useful to you. Then, of course, you've got the polls, you've got the breakout rooms, building interactivity. And what's more, if you stop people anonymously answering, you know who answered what where, which could be useful information later on when you want to analyze how people got on in the meeting. If you create something interactive, something that they've got to think about and answer, then why not put them into breakout rooms in small groups and get them to work together on it? It's a good use of time. It's a good use of people feeling they're more in a community than just being talked at. You don't have to have a invigilator or moderator to join each group if you don't want to, or if you don't have the people. But it's totally up to you how you run it. But breakout rooms are a really neat way of building up some more energy, interaction, involving people rather than talking at them. And do you know there's a group photo app? There's an app where you can get people to take photos and then you can use that in your PR afterwards. Oh, and must not forget Zoom Docs. Zoom Docs is really useful for two big reasons as far as I'm concerned. And I'll probably have thought of the third one by the time I get to the end of the second sentence. The first reason is it's a much more interactive experience if you share a Zoom doc. Now, you can share a Zoom doc so people can just see something. So you're showing them some text, but you can stop them editing it and just share it as a Zoom doc in the share buttons. Or you can share a Zoom doc for people to interact and add and edit the content. And of course, if you're going to do that, why not do a screen share and play around with annotating, that sort of thing as well? There are lots of things you can do in Zoom meetings that takes it above what the average person runs in the average Zoom meeting and makes it interesting and makes it compulsive and makes it seem like more of a webinar experience of a group training session, seminar, marketing, webinar, whatever. All these tools together take it to the next level and make it an interactive and helpful experience. And of course, when you finish, you have the ability to analyze some data because you're going to get the registration information. You must get people to register. Otherwise, how are you going to know to follow people up? Unless, of course, you have their details before. You're going to know how long they're on the meeting. You will know the answers to their poll questions. This means we've got a value version of webinars using Zoom meetings. I don't actually like using that at that level. I prefer using all the webinar features for reasons which I will just mention a few of in a moment. However, once I have signed people up to an event and they have then gone to that event and paid for some sort of membership, whether I do a webinar or I do a Zoom meeting can depend. 6, 7. It doesn't matter which one it is. It depends on the audience. And even when I'm in a webinar, you can still cheat to give that meeting experience because that's what a breakout room is. So you can always cheat with breakout rooms in webinars. But John, what are the problems? Come on, there have to be some downsides to running this. Well, the first downside is really simple. Everybody knows how many people are there. Yep, anyone can tick on the participants and see a list of who is in the room. That, for me, is the biggest problem. Because people can see who is there. You can hide it in webinars, you can't hide it in meetings. So it's no good saying, oh, well, there's 100 people here when there's only 2. Because everybody will know there's only 2 because they will see who they are and they will know who they are. So that, for me, is the biggest flaw. Can you automate the email process? Can you do all the registration beforehand in an automated fashion? No. In Zoom Webinars Plus, which is now known as Zoom Events, and Zoom allows you. But in Zoom Meetings, no. In Zoom Webinars, you have some basic functions as well. In Zoom Meetings, no. You just have your standard content, which again, you can edit the emails in Zoom. But again, they would apply to every Zoom meeting you run. But if you want an automated process and you want some interaction, you're probably going to have to spend money on a third-party product, like we mentioned earlier. I would therefore suggest that if you're on your own and you don't have a wonderful mic in the background to do your presentations for you and flip your slides around and even come to the screen in a moment and tell us his experience, there are lots of reasons why you could run Zoom meetings quite happily until you build up your following. As a simple system, it does work. And although there are people at Zoom who would really like you to run Zoom webinars and Zoom events, there are good reasons why, if you just are starting out with your first webinar, you could run it just using a basic version of Zoom meeting. In fact, if your presentation is only 25 minutes, half an hour, you could run it on a free version of Zoom meeting. Let's be honest. If you want to test the system, you could do it that way. Have I talked myself out of using Zoom events? No. Because it's just such a bigger game to play. However, does that mean that I'm suggesting that it's pretty and it only works when it's pretty and big? No. Zoom events works really well because nobody knows how many people are in the webinar, because it doesn't, you can turn it off. You don't share the numbers. You can have pre-recorded and what Zoom calls Simulive content. In other words, a pre-recorded webinar that starts automatically. You don't even have to be there, although I'm always there because I want to see what's happening in the chat and respond to the audience. Otherwise, I might as well send them to a YouTube video. All that's available to me. I can customize all the emails. I can run multiple events. And I can brand them all individually without having to keep flip-flopping like I'd have to do in Zoom meetings. I could have those running each one every week. I might even have each one running every week on 2 time zones, so I can deal with my European UK audience and my US audience. Yes, I know, Australia, you want one as well. I can always run 3 to help you guys as well. But I could do all of that in Zoom events. And so the argument about going to the bigger size is really more about, if you're producing one webinar to start building up your experience in running webinars, and you want to concentrate on having small groups who are going to really interact with you. And what I mean is you're going to want to keep turning on and off cameras and getting people to make comments and chat. And you want to make it like a little club meeting rather than a webinar to get your confidence and get you started. And probably a lot of your audience are going to be people you know from other things you do. They're not all going to be complete strangers. Then running Zoom meetings could be a really better place to start your online webinar life. And once you have the theme, the content, the flow, once you feel confident in it all, that may be the time when you start to think about using Zoom webinars. Because remember that you can pay as you go, which costs you about $2 per user to have people running your webinar. But I would suggest that 100 webinar license is going to be good value. And the good thing about 100 webinar license, it's the one license that Zoom allows you to buy on a monthly basis. Because if you want the bigger licenses, they expect you to make a yearly contribution to the system. If you run a monthly up to 100 people, you can run it for a month, cancel it, do some more marketing, run it again, a couple of months later maybe, run Zoom meetings in between, and build up your confidence and build up your users until you're happy to go up to a bigger game. Zoom meetings definitely still has a place, even when you're doing marketing seminars. But please use it because it's more applicable. Don't use it because it's cheap. Because when you have a cheap mindset, it's a lot harder to then ask your customers to pay $4,995 for something which you run on a webinar, on a Zoom basic license, which cost you $15. Let's be honest. If you do a cheap presentation, frankly, you'll attract cheap buyers. And you don't want to do that. You want to add the value. So please use Zoom Meeting for the things that it's good at. And then once you get to the point where you've got to start automating things and having regular webinars and repeating them over and over again, you will not want to do the same presentation 3 times a week. You'll get bored of it in your head, and then you'll look and sound unexciting. You want to build your webinar up until you have a point where you think it's good as you can probably do it. And then you take that recording and you use that recording to then run on future webinars. And you become the assistant in the background, which provides the meetings. Now, Mike has a company of his own, which he deals with the distribution people. And that means he has a lot of dealers, but he still runs webinars for them and presentations for them. So Mike, what sort of mix of events, webinars and meetings do you tend to run to your customer base?
Hello, everybody. Excuse me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lord Zoom Live this week, where we're talking about meetings. So I run all three. I do have the events package. So again, we do have access to Webinar Plus, which currently John and I are using for the show. And also majority of the time we do run meetings, but meetings are for our meetings. Will I have 100 viewer meeting? No. Will I have 100 viewer webinar? Yes. Will I have 400 viewer event? Yes. So that is where we start to delineate between the 3 different products for us as a company. So will I have up to 10 people in a meeting? Yes. 20, maybe. 30, probably not. 40, definitely not. 50, no. So are we ever going to get to 100 people in a meeting? No. Because at that particular point, in our view, in our use case, that would be more webinar. So that's where Webinar Plus would kick in for us, around the between 30 and 50 viewer number would be the number where we would delineate between the meeting functionality versus the Webinar Plus functionality. Now, again, we could always go up to our limit based on our events license, which is around 5. I believe we have the 500 seat license. So again, we have the flexibility within Webinar Plus to have that capacity. Now, when it comes to, as John mentioned, we have almost at this particular point, almost 500 dealers that we deal with from coast to coast to coast across Canada. So if they should, at least one, if not 2 people show up to one of our virtual events, notice I said virtual events, I'm using the events platform. And in the events platform, I'll have a mixture of meeting as well as Webinar Plus. So depending on the structure of our event, if it's going to be more of a trade show type of event, or if that event is just a training session event where we're having all of our brands show up and our dealers come once, and each individual meeting is its own, or each individual event within the event. Good old thesaurus Zoom problem again, of being able to event within an event. So again, will that event be classified as a Webinar Plus where they will be only speaking to the dealers, or do they want to have a more interactivity of a meeting environment? Then we will have the flexibility, of course, of then going down to a meeting type of scenario where if it's going to be more of a Q&A session entirely, we would more structure that towards meetings. And again, this is exactly what John is talking about, is that use meetings for meetings, you use Webinar Plus or Webinar Plus for those type of events that you will only have a couple of speakers that are talking to everybody and you really don't have any interactivity. And even then, as John mentioned, yes, you could always do breakout rooms within webinars, and you could also call people to the stage within webinars too. So there is that flexibility there. And then, of course, the event platform is the best place for our dealers to come, especially if we're having a multi-brand, a huge event where we might have artists show up, we might have brands show up, we might have representatives from all different types of situations show up from the industry or others. That governs the event platform in our view. So there's our delineation is, where we will have our sales team will have a one-on-one or one-on company meeting, and there might be 4 or 5 representatives from that company with our sales team, and there might be 4 or 5 representatives from Crosstracks Distribution Inc. in that meeting. There's your 10 or your possible 20, where it might be a training session where we want the interactivity where Crosstracks is training that dealer or Crosstracks is having a meeting with that brand, and there's going to be training. So that would be, again, a good use for meeting. But if it's webinar, then again, that is more of the equivalent of you going to a venue where you have a speaker in front of a podium and he is speaking to the crowd, where that is truly a webinar or webinar plus situation. Now, if you're turning that into a virtual situation and you're only using meeting, then as John mentioned, you are missing out in a lot of additional webinar functionality that could make it that much closer to what you have in person. And then, of course, if it is a multi type of event where you used to have in person, you would have multiple breakout rooms or multiple banquet rooms that your attendees could go into different rooms to have different seminars be told to them in, you've rented out a convention center where you have 5 to 10 rooms, then you're talking this equivalency should be on the Zoom Events platform, where now you have your list of webinars that are happening all day long, consecutively, simultaneously, non-simultaneously, one after each other. Make sure if you're doing one after each other, to give people a break, because even though this is a big beef that John and I have had as a pet peeve, is that because it's Zoom and it's automated, if you give them 30 seconds to leave one meeting and they'll go into the next meeting, technically that can be done. Can you technically do that in person? Have somebody bolt from one room in 30 seconds from their seat, out of that room, out the door, back in the door, find a seat, sit down, and have them be quiet and then present to them again? No, it's unrealistic. So again, build in that timing into the Zoom Events platform. As John would say, I digress. But that is basically the scenario of our use case of how we delineate and give you some real world, there we go, examples of where we delineate between meetings, then we go to Webinar Plus in our case, and then we go to events. What do you think, Johnny?
I think you've given a good explanation and a good set of examples there, Mike. My Toastmasters community is a public speaking group. And in theory, we could run it as a webinar because the whole idea is public speaking. However, it would be a nightmare because we are constantly changing the speakers, and everybody, that's the idea anyhow, everybody gets a chance to speak. So it makes much more sense for us to just spotlight or leave it for the active speaker. In other words, whoever's talking gets highlighted. And then we just run the meeting around that. So as a meeting format, it works better as a meeting format. I have seen quite a few, I don't really know what to call them. They're like, in the old days when we used to be face-to-face, if anyone can remember those days, it seems to be we never do now. But in the old days, we would have a business club and we would hire a venue, usually a pub, because alcohol is a good way to get people involved, especially in the evenings. And then we would invite local businesses to come here and network. Now, since we have stopped drinking and we've stopped going out at all, you can do that thing in a Zoom event, webinar, whatever flavor you want. But again, for that, most of them I see run it as a Zoom meeting Although, of course, now I'm thinking about it in my head, it would work just as well, if not better, in a Zoom webinar. But the one thing you do with those types of events is you do make great use of the breakout rooms, because the whole idea is to network. Oh, and time for a plug here. I have an app which will be released soon, which allows you to run breakout rooms. And the app remembers who Zoom put where. So when you run the breakout rooms again, it will shuffle people, but avoid sending people back to the same groups. So if you do have a networking meeting where you want people to have 3 or 4 sessions during that meeting, where they get to meet new people and not keep finding the same person turning up in everyone, which is frustrating when you're trying to network, I have an app that keeps a track of all the breakout rooms and shuffles people around. Breakout rooms are really good in networking meetings. You can have a presentation before and a bit of content afterwards. You can run some polls. There are also lots of other third-party products out there now. And I can think of 3 of them. One of them is mine, where you can have a list of all the participants in like a rotary name. I don't know what you call those really, but you can have a set of names and you can have the names whizzing around in a list or a column or on the screen, and then somebody shouts stop, or it just automatically stops and you can get to choose people at random. You can have games and things around that. That works better perhaps in a meeting environment. But as Mike said, and I hadn't even thought about this, so I apologize. Well done, Mike. If you're running a Zoom event can have multiple sessions. I think sessions is the word we're going to use now because it's been dropped by Zoom. So you can have multiple sessions, and those sessions during the event could be an all-day event. Those sessions could be a meeting, or they could be a webinar, or you could have, if you can get your licensing problem sorted out, you can have 2 sessions of 2 different meetings running at the same time in the same event. Obviously, you expect the audience to choose which of the 2 they go to, and hopefully they go evenly and you don't end up with 99% of people in one and 1 person in the other. But it is possible to mix things up in a Zoom event and have all these different things going on. The other little thing, I don't know if I really want to mention this, but I'm going to. You could have multiple meetings running one after the other. So you could have your event run in Zoom meetings with one meeting link for the morning session, and then there's a break, and then you have an afternoon session or a second session, and that could be run in the same with the same meeting link and the same meeting account, or it could be a separate one. Don't forget that when you're training and helping people, if you have a choice of things you want them to go to, in Zoom events, you set up multiple sessions. If you're just running it in Zoom meetings, you run 3 breakout rooms. They get to choose which one they do. And again, this is what we use in Toastmasters. We have a question of what would you like to learn, or what are you here to learn? And we'll give them a list of 3 or 4 options, because you can put it in a quiz question, and then you can get Zoom to turn that into a set of breakout rooms and automatically put all those people that said what they wanted to do into the breakout rooms that they needed to attend. So Zoom meeting has lots of mileage for running those small to medium groups. Now, I totally agree with Mike that probably if you're dealing one-to-one, or you're trying to give that impression of a one-to-one experience, then a Zoom meeting with 20 to 30 people is manageable. After that, it's going to get unmanageable if people start interacting with you en masse. If you've only got 2 or 3 people that are going to chat in the chat and put comments in, put poll questions, then you can get away with groups of 60, 70. But if you've got 20 or 30 people and you're working your audience well and they're interacting on a constant basis, you'll get snowed under if you go above those numbers. If you want to do group activities, then maybe you would have 70 or 80 people in a meeting, and you would be able to then break them up into groups of 5 or 10 or whatever your activity that you want, and make use of bigger numbers. But those bigger numbers get harder to manage in a meeting Because you just don't have, well, you have a lot more control than you probably realize from what we've been talking about today, but it is hard work and you probably need somebody to help you with all the background controls to keep the meeting flowing if you're doing the presentations. There's nothing more frustrating, well, it probably is, but there's nothing more frustrating to me than somebody saying, okay, well, now we're going to go into breakout rooms, and then spends the next 3 minutes trying to get the breakout room set up when it could have been done before or by somebody else or whatever, but it could have been done in a way that you could say, now we're going to breakout rooms. This is what we're going to do. Click the button and off they go into their breakout rooms. I have finished my notes. Mike, do you have anything else to add?
No, but the best way to, as John mentioned, is to think about your use case scenario of either for yourself, in our case, our company, or if you are related to or working with a video production company, take into consideration what your customer's true needs are. If you've done an event with them in the past where it was strictly a podium speaker, that was in speaking on a stage in front of an audience that might have a couple of microphones in the audience, then really this is a webinar. In this case, I would suggest, as John has, Webinar Plus. Again, it allows, again, for production studio, which is very much what I've been switching here in the background as John has been presenting to you today. So when it comes to meetings, of course, many people will get the add-on meeting that will take them from either 100 or 300, depending on your license, if you're pro or business or even enterprise, and then starting getting into the 1,000 people per meeting. Well, see, in our use case, that would be an event. I wouldn't even think about having a 1,000 person in one meeting. John, I'm correct with 1,000. There is a 1,000 meeting license, I believe, correct? 1,000 user.
Yeah. I've got 1,000 webinar license. I've got a 500 event license, but I've got multiple events licenses.
Right, but again, it makes, again, would someone actually have 1,000 people that are having the capability of being able to interact with you in a meeting environment? To me, that's not a meeting anymore. If I envision a meeting to be the amount of people that you can actually fit into a boardroom. Again, us being a corporate company, if I can fit 10 people in a boardroom, 15 people, 20 people in a boardroom, great. Once I'm getting beyond that 20 people in a physical boardroom, taking it back to the physical situation again, am I going to get 50 people? Am I going to get 1,000 people in a boardroom? Heavens, no. Am I going to get 100 people in a boardroom? No. Am I going to get 50 people in a boardroom? It better be a big boardroom. Right.
But as you said,
so again, go ahead, Johnny.
If you have, you might have 50 people on your meeting, but they may represent only 20 to 30 companies if you've got multiple people coming from different places, in which case it might well work. The other thing which I didn't have in my notes, and it's only while listening to Mike that I remember this, just because it's a Zoom meeting doesn't mean you aren't nailed down to having to be live the whole time. You can play a recording of something that you've recorded earlier or somebody else. There's no problem in having some pre-recorded content to mix into your meeting so that you don't have to do it all, shall we say? Also, if you put a bit of pre-recorded content, even if it's you, and you can be quite open and say, I'd just like to play this recording of the presentation which I recorded earlier so I can have a chance to have a rest and a drink and check on your chat messages while you watch this, and then play them some pre-recorded content. There's nothing wrong with that. That looks quite impressive because it shows you've taken some time to prepare everything as well if you've got pre-recorded content. The other thing you can do with your share is, don't forget, with sharing, you can pause sharing. And if you pause a screen share, it means that you can change what you're sharing in the background, but nobody in the audience will see it until you start the share again. So you can pause your screen share, go onto a web page that you need, get into the right place, then resume your screen share, and then you see what you want to show them. While it's paused, it's like a snapshot of the last thing the screen share was showing. I think some people, dare I say, of course I do, some people may be running webinars when they're really trying to give a meeting experience. As I said, the big red flag is if you're going to have a meeting that you're going to run on a regular event, and you may get one person turn up, you may get 20 people turn up, but you don't personally worry about that because you know over time the numbers balance out. Don't have any content or anything in your presentation which hints at there is being one or the other number of people there, because at some point it will show up, and that will confuse people and will also worry people, and they will start to think, is this real? And then once they start challenging you, if something's real, you're on a slippery slope, because then you start to have to confess, this bit's real, that bit's not real. I just tell people. But there are times when I want to run regular events over and over again, and it's easier in a webinar. Although there are times when, quite frankly, I think to myself, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be able to see all their lovely faces? But as Mike said, you can ask somebody from webinar audience to turn on their microphone and they can ask a question verbally. You can promote them to be a panelist in the webinar and they can appear just like Mike did then. And they can be then part of the panelists and not the audience. Oh, and by the way, oh yes, I can think of a good example of this. I run a set of medical webinars for a friend of mine. I say she's a friend of mine because she pays on time, and anybody who pays on time is a friend of mine. But we have sponsors for those events. And so what we do is we don't let the sponsors be normal panelists in a webinar. They join as a normal member of the audience. And then I promote them. They do their little pitch. And then I demote them back into the audience again. We used to run those as meetings. In fact, we had a multi-meeting version of Zoom running so that we could have the audience and the presenters in separate meetings. And then I used some technology to link them together. And that worked really well. But we soon realized that having the cameras on for the audience was a complete waste of time, because all they were doing was sitting there watching us like we were a TV show. So there was no point in having their cameras on. They more or less had decided in the way they acted in that meeting that there was no point in them being in a meeting version. It would make more sense to be in a webinar version so we could up the production values of the presenters and not see all the people in the meeting just sitting there or having their lunch while they're doing it, or answering the phone while they're supposed to be listening to our webinar, and other things like that, which was a little bit disconcerting. By the way, what is your worst faux pas that an audience member has performed for you? I will put this out there. The worst faux pas I've had, this is not Zoom bombing, this is genuine attendees. I had a couple of genuine attendees to a Toastmasters event who were watching the whole event sitting on their bed. That's not the faux pas. The faux pas is 3/4 of the way through the event, they thought it was a bit untidy and they made the bed while they were still on camera. No, I haven't got a thing to say for that. At least they were making the bed and not making out on the bed, I suppose. That was the only thing I suppose I was lucky for. But it is not needed to see people on camera if they are just going to be talked to and respond to you in the chat. That is not a reason to run Zoom meetings. If they are physically going to be with that experience, like Mike said, of being in a conference room, then yep, Zoom meetings is a great experience. When you're just starting out, Zoom meetings is a great experience. But I have to warn you that as soon as you start being successful, you will find that it's lacking and you'll need to go up. But that's fine, because if you've got to that point and proved that this whole having an event on Zoom is working for you, then that is fine that you get it working and then you pay more to get it working better. Let's face it, most of us have medium to high value services that we provide. And if you've got a webinar of 40 people and 5 to 10 of them sign up to whatever it is that you're selling, you're probably going to be absolutely over the moon. You don't expect 80 people to turn up to a webinar, 79 to sign up, and your mum to tell you she thought it was really good. Don't worry about the small numbers. It's the value that you give them and the value they pay you for what you're going to give them afterwards that makes the difference. And I'm sure that's just the same for your clientele as well, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, in our situation, it's a little different than it being the general public because, of course, we have a very specific audience, and there is a bit of encouragement that we do to our dealers to make sure that they are kept up to date with the latest that we are offering to them, and also that our brands are offering to them. So there is definitely, as I said, encouragement, if not a lot of suggestions in the regards, especially from our sales staff to our dealers to make sure that they do attend any of our, should it be a meeting where the salespeople are having one-on-ones with the dealers, to training where multiple people from their end are connecting to multiple people at our end, or am I bringing in brands in from international into that meeting so they can train a specific dealer on a specific product? Again, there's a lot of different variations that we do. Then, of course, that is dependent on, are they just presenting with slides? Or is it a training where they're actually showing the gear? So again, that would be different equipment at different locations and such. So there's a lot of different variations that we use. Meetings are more, again, targeted towards the smaller end. When it comes to specific, number count, again, we usually start limiting it, as John was saying, again, for us, it's been majority 20 to 30 has usually been our meeting limit per se. And again, when we invite people, we take into consideration who we're inviting and how many people they potentially will want to come to the event. And again, if to the session, right, I got to start doing that, to the session, and then I will choose if it is an event, a webinar plus, or meeting, depending on that vibe. Because if they're going to tell us that they're going to give it out to all of their customers, to our dealers' customers, there is the potential of a couple hundred people. Well, I don't necessarily need to see a couple hundred of their customers, where I would want to make sure that the dealer is shown as a participant, but I wouldn't necessarily need all their customers to be shown. So again, it could be a brand distributor dealer situation where we're presenting to their customers. Again, that would be a webinar. That would not be a meeting, even though it would be 50, maybe 100, maybe 150, maybe 200, maybe. Again, it would be still it would not be appropriate for me to use the meeting platform for me to do stuff like that, especially if it's going to be where we don't need to see everybody, as John was saying, everybody's video from each of their customers. And this is where, again, we would break it off into, you know, if it's going to be at that particular point, should this actually be on the events platform? Maybe it should. Maybe it shouldn't. Is there going to be registration? Maybe there should be. Maybe there shouldn't be. So it all depends on the situation. But majority of the time, our cutoff between meetings and webinars is anywhere between 20 to 30, and even pushing 50 would be definitely, I would be uneasy at that particular point, having 50 people in a meeting environment, to be able to, again, as John was saying, keep the control of it, unless there was a specific need where they wanted to be able to interact with 50 people at the same time.
Thanks, Mike. So there you have it. YouTube is quiet today. We've got no feedback or comments of anyone who wants to say anything. No questions, which is par for the course, really. You just don't know with YouTube. But today, I think we've covered a nice subject here for you. Zoom meetings do have a place, but please use Zoom meetings, or you use Zoom webinars or Zoom Webinars Plus or Zoom events. Just use the product that's right for the situation you have, because that's why Zoom has given us a selection of these products to do so. So for this week on Lord Zoom Live, thank you, Mike. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Have a good week. See you next week.
Every week we open wide the virtual stage where ideas spark and wisdom fills the page. From the UK to the land of maple trees, John and Mike bring clarity with ease. We're building meetings, webinars with might, helping you shine your message, taking flight. Whether you're new or you've done this before, Lord Zoom Live will help you do much more. We're building meetings, webinars with might, helping you shine your message, taking flight. Whether you're new or you've done this before, Lord Zoom Live will help you do much more. Thank you for joining us, we're glad you're here. Together we grow, it's loud and clear. On Zoom we connect, we learn, we grow. Welcome my friend, enjoy the show. From big events to breakout rooms with flair, we've got the tools and we're ready to share. Guest experts drop in, bringing gold each time, with insights and tricks to help you climb. Can't make it live, we've got you still. On YouTube and LinkedIn, we're giving that thrill. So tune in later or catch us next round. Either way, your success is where we're bound. Thank you for joining us, we're glad you're here. Together we grow, it's loud and clear. On Zoom we connect, we learn, we glow. Welcome my friend, enjoy the show. And make it live, we've got you still. On YouTube and LinkedIn, we're giving that thrill. So tune in later or catch us next round. Either way, your success is where we're bound. Now take the spotlight, the stage is yours. Bring your message through virtual doors. Each week we gather, and now you know you're not alone, so let it flow. Thank you for joining us, now go and shine. Share what you've learned, your voice, your time. With Lord Zoom Live, your power will grow. It's time to build your own show.